Leenat, welcome to Let the Quran Speak.
Thank you, Safiya.
I wanted to talk to you because you grew up in London and you still live in London. And this is where the Afzal murders took place, where they were tragically killed. So I thought it was interesting to speak to you to learn about your own experiences. And I want to begin by asking, how did you feel when you heard the news that this family was killed in this way?
So the tragic events happened less than a kilometer from where I live. Mm-hmm. So it was horrendous. Mm-hmm. We first thought it was an incident or an accident that happened, mm-hmm. and the community WhatsApp groups automatically blew up, thinking that it was a Brown family, and somebody saying, "Oh, I hope it was, an accident, and I hope it's nobody from our community, and I hope this is a mistake." Mm-hmm. Then we learned that it was someone within our community. Somebody responded who was a family member of the Afzal family, saying mm-hmm. that this is my family. Mm-hmm. It was horrendous and it was heartbreaking. Then we were all on our edges waiting for the police announcement to see if this incident was intentional mm-hmm. or hate motivated. Mm-hmm. And it was, which made it more horrific for our community. Mm-hmm. And as a small community in London, it was just hard, very hard.
And I know that you walked the same streets, you went to the same mosque. So how did that feel to know that it happened so close to home?
It meant that it could have been us.
Yeah.
It could have been anybody in our family. And mm-hmm. the fact that everyone goes for that evening walk during mm-hmm. COVID, mm-hmm. it just made it so real. And it wasn't close to home, it was home. Mm-hmm. And this family was our family.
Mm-hmm. Now, Leenat, can you speak about, racism and Islamophobia in London itself? Because you grew up there, and I'm assuming that this incident didn't necessarily surprise you, that you maybe have experienced that yourself.
Yeah, I mean, it was a very heartbreaking incident, and it's a very a violent Islamophobic act. Mm-hmm. But Islamophobia within our city in London, but also generally in Canada, is not unsurprising. Mm-hmm. And so growing up in London and in sort of the same neighborhood as the Afzal family, even 15 years ago, our home, being one of the only visible Muslim families in our neighborhood, was regularly egged mm-hmm. and vandalized every 2 weeks. Our cars and our house would be egged and vandalized. Mm-hmm. And we reported it a few times, but nothing really comes off of something that you don't have any suspicions of anybody about. Mm-hmm. And, if it's not hurting anybody, then who really cares?
Yeah.
So it was ignored, and my parents, being the model immigrants,
not wanting to ruffle any feathers,
never, they tried to play it down for us. Firstly, I think just to keep us calm, mm-hmm. but secondly, to show that we're still the best Canadians that we can be.
Mm-hmm. So that must have been very worrying for them to see that happen, to know that this was like a violent act right outside your home.
Yeah. For this event, my dad came over right away and he said, "You're not going outside anymore." Mm. Yeah. And my husband said, "We're not going to be walking on sidewalks." And I know my friends have called me, and there's so many in our community who are not going for those evening walks mm-hmm. anymore. And it's difficult. It's very hard. There are people who are trying to figure out how to learn self-defense. But how do you learn self-defense against a truck?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. It's not something that is you can protect yourself against. And a lot of us are asking those questions: is how did this person end up hating Muslims
that much,
so
right?
much?
Yeah.
At such a young age. If he was only 20, then he just graduated out of high school a few years ago. Mm-hmm. So what systems failed him?
Mm-hmm. So you mentioned high school, and that, piqued my interest. What about going to school in London? What was it like?
So, I mean, I had great experiences, and I also had difficult experiences in high school. Me and my friends, we tried to open the first Muslim Student Association in high school, and we had opposition from staff mm-hmm. and parents who called in saying, "We don't want a Muslim student group here." Mm. Although there was a Christian fellowship group, and there were so many other religiously organized religious organizations that were student led and had teacher advisors, but mm-hmm. we didn't have that access. It took a year and a half for us to get a Muslim Student Association started mm-hmm. With much opposition. And once we did get that started, it worked well. But anything that would happen which was not related to the Muslims, but some of the kids at school, would just become so much bigger because of the Islamophobia or the underlying, racism that was within our communities. So, for example, if there was a student fight, the mosque would get vandalized.
Oh.
So there was a time where a small student fight within our high school ended the masjid getting its windows broken, and the imam and the leadership coming to our school and trying to figure out who did it.
That's interesting because, I grew up in a big city, Toronto, and I don't really hear these sorts of stories, but I know that it must exist because, you're a visible minority, very visible in a place like London, right?
Yeah.
So I'm assuming that there's a lot more obvious racism towards you.
Yeah, and you don't really notice it because as a person who has always been visible in a minority, you're used to the stares and the glances and the stares and the glances.
Yeah.
And you don't know what it's like to not be looked at in a certain way until you're walking or you're with someone who doesn't get those stares and glances, or someone who notices that there's a different way that somebody's speaking to you versus them. And it's only when you can compare do you realize I've really been treated differently my whole life.
And I didn't even notice it.
I didn't even know.
Because it's my reality, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And that reality is hard to see when you're always in it.
So, Leenat, what do you think is the solution? I know it's a very hard issue to talk about, racism, Islamophobia. How do you solve this problem?
So I think for a lot of Muslims, when we see ourselves in a situation that is overtly Islamophobic, we need to speak out. We need to, gather our voices and say something. I think we need to come out of the model immigrant mentality. Just, keep quiet, keep your head down, and keep working hard, and start evolving into being the Canadian citizens that say something is wrong and be able to criticize or criticize our country, knowing that we still love it. So,
because no one's going to give you your rights on a platter. You have to fight for it, right?
Exactly, and we have to do that now. I think as first, second, third generation immigrants, we now have to say, yes, we're here to stay, and yes, we're going to fight for what we deserve, which is to be treated like everyone else. Whether it is to keep our hijab on in every province, or it is to get that job that we have been sidelined for.
Lena, do you have a message for the wider Canadian community or even the London community? What do you want to see them do to support Muslims?
And you know what? It's the same message that I would give to the London community and the wider Canadian community. And that is, be an ally and be a true ally. Look at yourself in the mirror. See whether your institution, your organization, your business, caters to people of color, caters to Muslims, caters to visible Muslims. Do your business events, do your institutional events happen in bars, in pubs, which are exclusive to Muslims. Muslims can't go to bars and pubs. Are all your social events at bars and pubs? I mean,
which happens in many professional settings,
it happens,
right? Graduate school, law school, everything.
Exactly. And these are things that really bar Muslims from advancing in society. And they really hurt us as people these are our systemic barriers that are not allowing Muslims to advance. And this is what would create a non-inclusive environment where maybe you don't know that you're excluding people by creating these events. So really open your eyes and ask the people around you how to best facilitate their and accommodate their difference rather than exclude them from it.
Or even assuming that right? Because sometimes people assume that I know the solution and I'm gonna do it, but then it's the wrong solution, right? It's one that doesn't actually cater to the community that you want to help.
Exactly. I mean, there was this one time that I went to a Ramadan dinner and there was alcohol being served. So I thought that was very interesting. But and that comes from not having asked those questions to your Muslim fellows. And sincere questions are always welcome. If you want to learn, then please go ahead and ask those questions. And when we ask those questions and we learn a little bit more, we can understand how to accommodate and how to create and build a better community for ourselves.
Lena, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you, Sophia.
If you enjoyed this video, click like and subscribe, and please donate to support our work at QuranSpeaks.com.